let me throw out a thought that's maybe a little bit different spin on this.
Okay.
Going in a maybe religious direction here. I mean, we were talking about when people make bad decisions, a price has to be paid somewhere by someone.
Yeah.
Sometimes a price must be paid. So you could say, like, let's extend when we say bad decision. Let's say we're talking about a sin, right? A price has to be paid. Like, could we totally make a religious spin on this here and say, like, well, that's like what Jesus did, right? Do you get what I'm saying? Like, we're talking about people not having to pay the consequences for their decisions. I mean, it made me think about humanity's sin and how a price must be paid for that, right?
Yeah.
If not by us, it must be paid, and that's what Jesus did on the cross.
Yeah, and that is part of the reason why earlier I said something along the lines of there most definitely needs to be mercy in many circumstances, but that part of that mercy needs to be mercy or part of that grace. It needs to be an understanding of the mercy or grace that's extended to you. So, for instance, like if we're talking about people who burn down homes and buildings and stuff, right? If insurance companies just foot the cost, or let's say some particularly generous person came in and paid for all of the things, right? So that the community wouldn't be negatively affected, whether by the insurance company or anything else, right? If there is not an individual sitting here up on trial and they say, like, you need to repay $1.2 million. And then they pull up the next individual and they're like, you need to repay $800,000. And then the next person comes up, you need to repay $4 million, right?
Mm-hmm.
These people will not understand the gravity of their choices and make a change going forward if they do not first confront essentially the debt that must be paid before they receive that mercy.
Right. Yeah, well, that's a critical part about salvation is
Yes.
understanding the debt that you have, basically.
Yeah.
Because
And
if you don't understand that, how can you understand the extravagance of the cancellation of that debt, basically?
so that, and I
Not
would,
cancellation, but
the
because it's not
covering,
canceled.
let's
The
say.
covering of your debt, yes.
Yeah, that, and I also think without an understanding of what was wrong, you cannot change things going forward. Without pulling that person to the side and being like, you're gonna owe $4 million. Like that's the rest of your life. Like, this could be some particularly young person. The rest of your life, you're going to be working to pay off a debt because of some bad decision that you made when you were insert young age here.
Yeah.
Literally, the
Or
rest of your life.
in the instance with, with your sister breaking the headphones, like,
Yeah.
if she never has to face or realize, like, okay, how much did these headphones cost to replace?
Yeah.
Like, how can she understand truly what happened?
Yeah, and there was never an instance where she was confronted by, like, my mom, let's say, and my mom went, you need to repay your brother for these.
Right.
You need to go buy him new headphones. Like, that never happened. If that had happened, right, and I had gone, like, I forgive you, forget about it, don't do it again, obviously, and learn how to, take better care of things or learn this lesson, right? Then I think it would have landed particularly differently. She would have looked at it and been like, there would be for most people at least, I think there's a mentality shift. There's a belief where you look at it and you go, wow, I almost had to pay, even if it's something like headphones, like I almost had to pay $40
Right.
because because I was careless with this thing, because I was too rough with that or whatever.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I think if I understand what you're saying, it's basically just like it's critical to understand basically the severity of like what you've done, because otherwise how on earth can you understand, the magnitude of you getting away without consequences for it.
Yeah.
I mean, going back to the thing that annoys you the most, I think also part of it is when these things happen and people don't face the consequences and the consequences go on someone else. But then another layer that I think adds to that annoyance and is maybe necessary to be of the level of annoyance that we're talking about is them not actually seeing or understanding what it is they have done. Is
Yeah.
that a factor of it? Like when
Yeah.
when that happens and people don't actually see or understand really what it is they've done.
Yeah, and I talked about that earlier a bit, where like when there's not a recognition of what went wrong,
Right.
nothing's going to change. We're doomed to repeat this, and essentially, if we operate under these same pretenses going forward, this person just screws person after person after person after person after person. And so we just have an endless cycle of this person. Let's say it's breaking something, okay? We have an endless cycle of this person breaking things and not suffering consequences, and then just person after person who was generous and lent them something.
Keeps having to pay the price for it.
Exactly. Versus in the other instance where even if there's mercy, right, or grace given for something, that affects one person. And then a change is made, and that person doesn't continue to break things. Or if they have to pay it back, then they paid a price, they learn. That's it.
Yeah, it's interesting how that ties to salvation, because I have thought about this recently in terms of understanding, like, the full truth of the gospel and everything. Like, I think I've recently really come to the more clear and deep understanding that the very critical first step of that, like, you can't get anywhere past if you don't, check off this first step, which is understanding the severity and magnitude of your sin and understanding the sin that is within you. Like, if you don't understand that and you can't grasp that, like, you're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
You're not going to understand everything, right? Like, isn't this what like Jordan Peterson references a lot about, like, what does he say? Something with the shadow.
Sure. Okay, you're talking about the Jungian integration of the shadow that Peterson
Yeah, maybe.
often discusses. You have to first look in the mirror and understand that not only are you capable of evil, but there's that part inside of you.
Right. And if you don't understand that, like, you're not going anywhere with the gospel. Like, that means nothing to you if you don't understand what it is you've done and what you're guilty of.
Yeah, I think ultimately there needs to be a balance kind of between mercy and grace and holding people accountable and paying a price. But in either case, what we need is that recognition of reality. And either path can result in a good positive change and can be a solution going forward. And it's obviously going to be dependent on the circumstances, right? In some instances, the price needs to be paid because the rest of the community and the person who was wronged can't bear the massive burden that this person who wronged somebody else has put on them, right? And in other instances, the person who's wronged someone also can't bear it. So the community and the person need to step in and surround them. And
or
I think,
in the instance of salvation, like, we are not capable of
Yeah.
bearing the full weight of our sin.
yeah. So it's definitely situationally dependent, but I think in either case there needs to be this recognition of reality itself, of the situation that we're in, and people need to come together and have a discussion about what it is that's happened and options moving forward. And I think in too many cases, people are not even made aware of these things. or they're not forced to be made aware in certain cases, like with the headphones with my sisters. At no point was she forced to be made aware of the gravity of that choice. It wasn't just wrapping a cord up quick. It was destroying my pair of headphones.
$50-$60 or whatever it was for a 14-year-old or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think ultimately, there are those couple of paths forward, but no matter what happens, we need to have a recognition of the reality of the situation. And too often, I don't see that occurring, and it frustrates me when I see that step one hasn't occurred, and on top of that, that someone else is suffering because of it. And I can also project forward and see that line of other people who are going to continue to suffer because this person hasn't learned a lesson, one way via grace and mercy, or two via needing to pay for their actions.